On September 2nd, 2025, a speedboat racing through Caribbean waters exploded in a ball of fire. 11 people died instantly. The boat disintegrated, and from the White House, President Donald Trump posted footage of the strike on Truth Social with a simple caption, "Loaded with drugs. This will happen again." What most Americans didn't know that day was that the boat had been turning back toward Venezuela when the missile hit, that the strike was followed by a second one, that survivors of the first explosion were deliberately killed in what military insiders call a double tap, and that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had allegedly given a verbal order to SEAL Team 6 that would later spark a constitutional crisis, leave no survivors. That September strike wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of what has become the largest American military buildup in Latin America since the invasion of Panama in 1989. Today, more than 15,000 U.S. troops are stationed across the Caribbean. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's most advanced aircraft carrier, sits off Venezuela's coast. F-35 fighter jets patrol the skies. Submarines lurk beneath the waves. And Trump has made one thing abundantly clear. Nicolas Maduro's days are numbered. But this isn't about drugs. It's not about democracy. It's not even about the humanitarian crisis that has driven millions of Venezuelans to flee their country. This is about something far more complex, something that involves oil reserves larger than Saudi Arabia's, a domestic political calculation that requires Trump to deliver a foreign policy win before the 2026 midterms, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what military intervention in Venezuela would actually accomplish. This is the story of how America is sleepwalking into a war that 76% of Americans oppose, a war that Trump's own party is beginning to question, a war that could reshape the entire Western Hemisphere, and a war that started not with a declaration from Congress, but with a kill order in the Caribbean. The official narrative is simple. The Trump administration is fighting drug cartels. Venezuela has become a narco state under Maduro. Boats loaded with cocaine and fentanyl are streaming toward American shores. Trump is using military force to intercept them, protecting American families, stopping the flow of poison that kills tens of thousands of Americans every year. It's a narrative that sounds compelling, until you look at the details. Between September 2nd and December 4th, 2025, U.S. forces conducted at least 22 strikes on vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. 87 people have been confirmed dead. The administration claims every boat was operated by narco-terrorists, specifically members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan prison gang, and Colombia's National Liberation Army. But here's the problem. The administration has provided no evidence. No drug seizures have been publicized. No manifest showing what the boats were carrying. No arrests of cartel leaders, just bodies. And videos of missiles turning boats into floating coffins. Intelligence analysts who spoke to the Washington Post on condition of anonymity said that Venezuela's actual role in the drug trade is being significantly overstated. Most cocaine entering the United States comes through Mexico, not Venezuela. The boats being targeted are often small-scale smugglers, not major cartel operations, and some weren't smuggling anything at all. Fishermen, migrants, people in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dead because the rules of engagement shifted from interdiction to assassination. On October 1st, Trump formally notified Congress that the United States was engaged in a non-international armed conflict with unlawful combatants in the Caribbean. The language was deliberate. Under international law, in an armed conflict, you can kill enemy fighters even when they pose no immediate threat. It's a legal framework that turns interdiction into warfare. It's also a framework that bypasses the need for congressional authorization, at least initially. But what Trump didn't tell Congress, what he didn't tell the American people, is that the mission had already evolved beyond counter narcotics. By mid October, Venezuelan opposition figures and independent analysts were confirming that U.S. objectives had shifted. This wasn't about stopping drugs anymore, this was about regime change. The most disturbing revelation came in November. The Washington Post, citing two anonymous sources, reported that Pete Hegseth had given SEAL Team 6 a verbal order during the September 2nd operation: leave no survivors. The initial missile strike had left two men alive in the water. A second strike, a double tap, killed them. The practice is controversial even in active war zones. In what the administration framed as a law enforcement operation, it's potentially criminal. When confronted about the report, Hegseth didn't deny it. He said operational details were classified. The White House said the strikes were lawful under the armed conflict framework, but human rights organizations were less ambiguous. Amnesty International called it extrajudicial execution. The Colombian government accused the United States of murder. Venezuela filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court. And inside the Pentagon, senior officers were quietly expressing alarm. Not because they opposed taking action against drug traffickers, but because the way the mission was being conducted violated established rules of engagement, raised legal risks for service members, and was creating a precedent that could be used against American forces in future conflicts. One retired four-star general told CNN, "If we can kill people in boats without proof they're combatants, what stops Russia from doing the same to our allies? What stops China from applying this logic in the South China Sea? We're shredding the laws of war for a political stunt." The strikes were just the visible part of a much larger operation. In mid August, the U.S. military began what it called a counter narcotics surge in the Caribbean. Warships deployed, personnel levels increased. The official reason: stopping drugs. The real reason became clear over the following months. This was a military buildup designed to create facts on the ground, to apply maximum pressure on Maduro, to either force him to flee or create the conditions for his overthrow. By early December, the deployment had reached staggering proportions. The USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group, including destroyers and cruisers, stationed itself in the Caribbean. F-35 Lightning II fighters, the most advanced stealth aircraft in the world, began operating from bases in Puerto Rico and Colombia. An unknown number of submarines, likely including Ohio-class guided missile submarines capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, were confirmed to be in the region. Marines, Special Operations Forces, intelligence assets, surveillance aircraft, 15,000 personnel in total. And Trump kept saying the same thing. Very soon, land operations will begin very soon. On December 10th, the operation escalated again. U.S. Coast Guard personnel, backed by the Navy, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security, rappelled from helicopters onto an oil tanker off Venezuela's coast. The vessel, called the Skipper, was seized in international waters. Attorney General Pam Bondi posted video of the operation on social media, showing commandos descending onto the ship's deck. Trump announced the seizure at a White House event, calling it the largest tanker ever seized. He told reporters to follow the tanker if they wanted to know what was really happening. The tanker had been carrying Venezuelan crude oil. A federal judge had issued a warrant for its seizure months earlier, claiming links to Iranian-backed terror groups. Legally, the operation was on firmer ground than the boat strikes, but symbolically, it represented a massive escalation. The United States had just seized a ship carrying the primary source of revenue for the Venezuelan government: Oil exports are Venezuela's economic lifeline. Over 900,000 barrels per day. With the tanker seizure, Trump was sending an unmistakable message. We can choke your economy whenever we want. Venezuela's response was immediate. Maduro called it international piracy and blatant theft. He ordered coastal defense systems activated. The Venezuelan military, which had been conducting regular drills for months in anticipation of an American attack, moved into defensive positions, and Russia, still reeling from its losses in Syria, issued a statement supporting Venezuela's territorial integrity. It was empty rhetoric from a weakened power, but it illustrated the larger geopolitical stakes. What happens in Venezuela doesn't stay in Venezuela. China, watching carefully, has significant investments in Venezuelan oil. Russia has sold weapons systems to Caracas. Cuba, dependent on Venezuelan subsidies, views Maduro's survival as existential. An American military operation in Venezuela wouldn't just be a regional affair, it would send shockwaves through the entire global system. Inside the Trump administration, debates were intensifying over what comes next. According to CNN, officials were working on plans for what would happen if Maduro fell or fled. Who would take power? How would the transition be managed? Would U.S. forces occupy Caracas? For how long? The discussions revealed a problem that has plagued every American military intervention of the past 30 years. No clear endgame. The administration could articulate what it wanted to destroy. It couldn't articulate what it wanted to build. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a hardliner of Cuban descent who views Maduro's ouster as a blow to Cuba's communist government, has been one of the most vocal advocates for aggressive action. Rubio has repeatedly said that Maduro is an illegitimate leader heading a narco-terrorist organization. But when pressed on whether the goal is regime change, Rubio denies it. The administration's position is contradictory. They want Maduro gone. They've designated his government a foreign terrorist organization. They've deployed overwhelming military force. They've seized Venezuelan assets. But officially, they're not pursuing regime change. They're just fighting drugs. It's a transparent fiction. And everyone knows it. The problem is that regime change by military force requires congressional authorization. The War Powers Act, passed in 1973, explicitly limits a president's ability to commit U.S. forces to hostilities without congressional approval. Trump notified Congress of the armed conflict in October. But that notification was about counter-narcotics operations, not an invasion of Venezuela. On December 3rd, 4 senators, Democrats Tim Kaine, Chuck Schumer, and Adam Schiff, along with Republican Rand Paul, filed a war powers resolution that would block military action against Venezuela without congressional approval. We are being dragged into a war with Venezuela without legal basis or congressional authorization, Schiff said in a statement. The Senate must be prepared to stop an illegal war that would needlessly place at risk thousands of American service members. The resolution under Senate rules is privileged, meaning it must be brought to a vote within days. But whether it will pass is uncertain. Many Republicans support the strikes and the military buildup. They see it as Trump being tough on cartels and authoritarian regimes. They don't want to be seen as weak on national security. Even some Democrats, particularly those from states with significant Venezuelan American populations, are reluctant to oppose Trump's Venezuela policy too loudly. The broader American public is less enthusiastic. A CBS News poll conducted in late November found that 76% of Americans didn't believe Trump had adequately explained his Venezuela policy. Only 13% saw Venezuela as a major threat to U.S. security. Support for military strikes was low, support for a ground invasion was almost non-existent. Trump campaigned on ending forever wars. His base elected him to bring troops home, not deploy them to South America. And yet here he is on the verge of launching the largest US military operation in Latin America in over 3 decades. Trump's own words have been contradictory and confusing. On November 20th, he said land strikes inside Venezuela could come imminently. On December 1st, after meeting with his national security team, he again said operations would begin very soon. But 2 days later, when asked about the military buildup, he told reporters on Air Force One not to read anything into the troop deployments. On December 8th, he indicated he'd spoken with Maduro by phone but wouldn't say when or what was discussed. I wouldn't say it went well or badly, Trump said. The mixed signals have left allies, adversaries, and even Trump's own officials unsure what the actual plan is. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer captured the confusion. President Trump throws out so many different things in so many different ways, you don't know what the heck he is talking about. Some analysts believe the entire military buildup is a bluff, a psychological operation designed to terrify Maduro into fleeing without firing a shot, apply enough pressure, make the threat credible enough, and someone close to Maduro, a general and intelligence chief, will decide it's time to cut a deal, offer Maduro asylum, let him take his money, and go to a country that won't extradite him. Russia, maybe, Belarus, some Gulf state with no extradition treaty. It's a strategy that has worked before, but it's also a strategy that can backfire spectacularly. Because if Maduro doesn't leave, if he calls Trump's bluff, then what? Does Trump back down? Does he lose face after weeks of threats? Or does he follow through with an invasion that the American public doesn't want, Congress hasn't authorized, and the Pentagon has serious reservations about? The military challenges of a Venezuela operation are significant. Venezuela is not Panama in 1989, it's not Grenada in 1983. This is a country of 30 million people with a military of over 100,000 active personnel. The terrain is challenging: mountains, jungles, urban centers. Caracas alone has a metropolitan population of nearly 5 million. If the Venezuelan military decides to fight, if Maduro arms civilian militias, if Cuban and Russian advisors assist in organizing resistance, this could turn into a grinding, bloody conflict. American forces would win any conventional engagement, but occupying Venezuela, stabilizing it, preventing it from becoming a failed state, rebuilding its institutions, those are tasks that make Iraq and Afghanistan look simple by comparison. There's also the oil question. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Canada. For years, those reserves have been underexploited because of mismanagement, corruption, and sanctions. But the potential is enormous. Trump has repeatedly mentioned Venezuela's oil in his public comments about the crisis. He said the country has tremendous wealth and massive resources. Some critics believe that's the real reason for the military buildup. Not drugs, not democracy, oil. A chance to bring Venezuelan oil production under the influence of US companies, to break OPEC's grip on global markets, to flood the world with cheap crude and drive down prices, which would politically benefit Trump domestically. Trump's defenders reject this interpretation. They point out that oil prices have been relatively stable, that US shale production has made America less dependent on foreign oil, that there's no economic necessity driving this policy. But the optics are hard to ignore. A Republican president threatening military action against an oil-rich country. It's a narrative that writes itself. And for millions of people around the world, especially in Latin America, it confirms every suspicion they've ever had about American imperialism. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore. In 1989, the United States invaded Panama to remove Manuel Noriega, a dictator and drug trafficker who had become a liability. The operation was swift. Noriega was captured. He was brought to the United States, tried, and imprisoned. But Panama is a small country, and the US had a military presence there already because of the canal. Venezuela is a different scale entirely. The United States has a long history of military intervention in Latin America. Guatemala in 1954, Dominican Republic in 1965, Chile in 1973, though that was covert, Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989. Each time the stated reasons were noble: stopping communism, protecting democracy, fighting drugs. Each time the actual reasons were more complicated: protecting business interests, maintaining regional hegemony, preventing the rise of governments hostile to US influence. Those interventions left deep scars. Across Latin America, the memory of American military power being used to overthrow governments, install friendly dictators, and suppress popular movements remains vivid. It's why many Latin American countries have been conspicuously silent about Trump's Venezuela policy. They don't love Maduro. They think he's a disaster, but they also don't trust US military intervention. They've seen this movie before, and they know how it ends. The Trump administration seems genuinely surprised by the lack of regional support. They expected other countries to cheer as America removed a dictator. Instead, most Latin American governments have urged diplomatic solutions. Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, countries that should theoretically welcome Maduro's removal, have all expressed concern about US military action. Only a few right-wing governments, like those in Argentina and El Salvador, have openly supported Trump's approach. Even traditional US allies in the region are nervous. There's another dimension to this crisis that rarely gets mentioned in American media: the refugee situation. Venezuela's collapse under Maduro has produced one of the largest refugee crises in the world. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country since 2015. Most have gone to Colombia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and other Latin American countries. The burden on those nations has been immense. If the United States invades Venezuela, if the country descends into chaos, if a civil war erupts, that refugee flow will intensify. Millions more will flee, and many of them will head north toward the US border. Trump's immigration hardliners argue that removing Maduro will eventually reduce migration by making Venezuela livable again. But in the short term, war creates refugees. Destabilization creates refugees. And those refugees will become Trump's problem. The administration has also struggled to explain how military action aligns with Trump's America First doctrine. Trump campaigned on the idea that the United States has wasted trillions of dollars on foreign wars that don't serve American interests. He promised to bring troops home, to focus on domestic problems, to stop being the world's policeman. His supporters loved that message. But now Trump is deploying 15,000 troops to the Caribbean to pressure a government in Venezuela. He's spending billions on a military buildup. He's risking American lives. And the justification, stopping drugs, doesn't add up. If drugs are the concern, there are far more effective ways to address the opioid crisis than invading Venezuela. Treatment programs, border security, going after the Mexican cartels that actually control most of the trafficking routes. But those approaches don't generate dramatic videos. They don't produce political wins. They don't allow Trump to look tough and decisive. There's a growing sense among Trump's critics and even some of his supporters that this isn't about policy at all, it's about politics. Trump needs a foreign policy victory. His first term was defined by chaos, failed summits with North Korea, a rushed withdrawal from Afghanistan that happened under Biden but was set up by Trump's deal with the Taliban, trade wars that hurt American farmers, and a pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. His second term so far has been marked by the Ukraine controversy, NATO tensions, and domestic fights over immigration and the economy. A swift, successful military operation that removes a dictator, liberates a country, and allows Trump to declare victory would be a game changer. It would dominate the news. It would rally his base. It would make him look strong. And it would set the stage for the 2026 midterms, which are less than a year away. But military operations rarely go as planned. They escalate, they drag on, they produce unintended consequences. And if Trump invades Venezuela and it turns into a quagmire, if American soldiers start dying, if the occupation becomes a nightmare, the political cost will be devastating. Democrats will attack him for starting an unnecessary war. His own base will feel betrayed, and America's reputation, already damaged by decades of intervention, will suffer another blow. On December 1st, Trump held a meeting at the White House to discuss next steps on Venezuela. According to sources who spoke to CNN, the attendees included Pete Hegseth, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane, Marco Rubio, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. No official readout was provided, but leaks from participants suggested the discussion was tense. Hegseth and Rubio reportedly pushed for immediate action. Rubio argued that Maduro was weaker than ever, that the military buildup had created a window of opportunity, and that waiting would allow Maduro to consolidate. Kane, representing the Joint Chiefs, expressed caution. He reportedly told Trump that while the U.S. military could easily defeat Venezuelan forces, the post-conflict phase would be extraordinarily complex. He mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan as cautionary examples. He asked what the mission would be: defeat Maduro, occupy Venezuela, rebuild the country, and for how long? Trump, according to sources, listened but didn't make a final decision. He told the group he wanted more options. He wanted to know what a limited strike would accomplish. Could they hit Maduro directly? Could they destroy key military targets and leave? Could they avoid a full invasion? The questions revealed Trump's frustration. He wants Maduro gone, but he doesn't want to own the aftermath. He wants the victory without the cost. It's a fantasy, and everyone in the room knew it. The conversation around the table also touched on domestic politics. Stephen Miller reportedly argued that removing Maduro would help with immigration, that stabilizing Venezuela would reduce the flow of migrants to the U.S. border, that Trump could sell the operation as protecting American security. But others in the meeting were skeptical. They pointed out that the American public opposes the operation, that Congress is resistant, that even Republicans are starting to question the strategy. Miller's response, according to one source, was blunt. We don't win by listening to polls, we win by acting. Since that meeting, the rhetoric has intensified. Trump has repeatedly said Maduro's days are numbered. He's hinted that negotiations are ongoing, but hasn't provided details. He's suggested that if Maduro simply left, everyone would like that. But there's no sign Maduro is going anywhere. The Venezuelan president has survived years of sanctions, international isolation, economic collapse, and internal opposition. He's not a man who scares easily, and he knows that if he leaves Venezuela, he'll face arrest and extradition. The United States has indicted him on drug trafficking charges. He's on America's most wanted list. Leaving power means spending the rest of his life in prison. So he's dug in. He's prepared to fight. And that means Trump's bluff, if it is a bluff, is being called. The question now is what happens next? Does Trump follow through with military action? Does he try to find a diplomatic off ramp? Does he declare victory based on the tanker seizure and the boat strikes and move on? Or does he escalate further, launching strikes inside Venezuelan territory and triggering a regional crisis? The world is watching, and the answers will determine not just the fate of Venezuela, but the future of American foreign policy, the stability of Latin America, and the credibility of international law. Because what's happening in the Caribbean right now isn't just about one country or one dictator. It's about whether military force can still be used unilaterally by great powers, whether the rules that governed international relations for the past 80 years still apply, whether might makes right, or whether there are limits, even for the United States. As of December 15th, 2025, 15,000 American troops remain in the Caribbean. The USS Gerald R. Ford is still off Venezuela's coast. Submarines are still patrolling. Trump is still threatening. Maduro is still in power. Congress is still debating. And the American people are still asking a question that no one in the administration seems willing to answer. Why are we doing this? What's the end game? And what happens if this goes wrong? The answers will shape the next decade. And they're coming soon because Trump has made it clear something is going to happen very soon.